It used to be that if you wanted to have a child, you had to be married. If you wanted to have a sex life, you had to be married. Now these things are available to women regardless of marital status. And many people, certainly the two of us included, think that's a very good thing. And so when you see this kind of conservative panic about marriage, what it is really about is the fact that we have all of these legal and cultural changes that make women less dependent on marriage. And so their solutions are to bring those back, to further incentivize marriage, to further stigmatize those who don't adhere to that lifestyle.
Hello, and welcome to the Politics Girl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. I'm in Chicago this week for the Democratic Convention, and hopefully you're following my feed and getting all the information as I know it. But as I watch what we hope will be the first female president on the convention stage this week, I thought we would talk about what the other side is offering when it comes to women, women's rights, and womanhood. You might remember today's guest, Julie Kohler, president of BMK Consulting, a philanthropic and nonprofit strategy consulting firm, and senior advisor at the New Schools Institute for Race, Power, and Political Economy, as the host of the successful Wonder Media Network podcast, White Picket Fence, who we had on last year to talk about motherhood as a political identity and groups that were weaponizing it like Moms for Liberty. Julie is now back with a new season of White Picket Fence, which focuses on the marriage panic and the extremist movement that is gaining steam with conservatives to roll back no-fault divorce laws, as well as efforts described in Project 2025 to restore the American family and define that family through a very specific lens. So without further ado, please welcome my guest, writer, social commentator, and host of the White Picket Fence podcast, Julie Kohler. Welcome back, Julie.
Oh, it's so great to be back with you. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for coming. I mean, I'm going to be at the Democratic Convention when this airs, listening to Vice President Harris and Governor Walz talk about restoring women's rights, in direct contrast to the Republican ticket, who has taken deep pride in stripping us of our rights and only want to go further. But you've been talking about this for a while. Your podcast, White Picket Fence, has been looking into the inequities affecting women since America's founding, basically. But this new season really digs into the institution of marriage to uncover what's behind this kind of latest conservative push to return us to what you and I will call traditional family structure. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we started planning this season of the podcast long before J.D. Vance was obviously propelled into the national spotlight as Donald Trump's running mate. And with that, kind of started getting all of this media attention to the now infamous childless cat lady comments and, all of this frankly, his policy agenda that is really a retro and now increasingly being talked about as weird family agenda. But what I had been seeing for quite a while now, for over a year, was this growing crescendo of marriage talk that was being echoed in a whole number of different outlets. So we certainly saw it among conservative, kind of far-right social influencers. We saw it taking hold in numbers of conservative think tanks. We saw them actively cultivating more and more powerful Republican politicians at the highest levels of office, including Vance himself. And what was particularly concerning to me really echoed in numbers of mainstream media outlets. Now, the ways that they framed marriage were not exactly the same across all of those different audiences, but what was common was that we kept sort of hearing this constant hand-wringing on the fact that families are changing, that, family patterns are changing in this country, that people are marrying less often and at later ages. And we kept hearing like this kind of extolling of the virtues of marriage and this implication that marriage was somehow this magic elixir, that if we could just get more people married, we would solve all of the problems in this country that currently ail us. And what was concerning to me is that I didn't see a lot of critical pushback. And I think it's kind of for a few reasons. One is that we're just dealing with a lot right now, right? And I'm not sure that necessarily before Vance, we were, everyone was kind of giving this their full attention. Second, I think it's sometimes easy to dismiss this as like so extreme, we shouldn't even have to take it seriously. But third, and this is what I think is really dangerous about this moment, is that some of the rhetoric sounded relatively innocuous. Like, who among us is anti-marriage? Who doesn't love love, right? Like these are kind of, they can talk about a pretty extremist agenda in ways that sound common sense. And so what our goal has always been at White Picket Fence, at the podcast, is to really uncover some of the things that are hidden in plain view and to raise awareness about the more subtle ways that injustice and inequity are perpetuated in society. And even though a few guys kind of popping off on the virtues of marriage may not seem like the greatest threat to our democracy at this particular moment, I really wanted to bring attention to the ways that it is giving cover to and fueling an extremist agenda that is specifically designed to make marriage more ubiquitous again, make marriage more compulsory again, and do that by taking aim at the laws and policies that make women in particular less dependent on marriage and enable us to lead fulfilling lives in whatever family structure or way that we want to.
Right, right. I mean, what JD Vance is saying is obviously getting a lot of attention because it's outrageous and it's disparaging and all this talk of childless cat ladies who want to make everyone's lives as miserable as their lives are. But I think what you're trying to say is that JD Vance isn't some outlier, but rather he's part of this growing movement of conservatives that are in kind of a full-fledged panic about changing family patterns. And it's not just that women are childless, it's that many women are delaying marriage or not getting marriage at all or, foregoing it completely. It's where the incel movement comes from. It's like, why can't we women just be like my mother again? And you're like, because we all looked at your mother and we were like, she looks miserable and we don't want that, right? We're sort of in what you call the midst of a moral panic about marriage, where there's a bunch of people going like, if they don't do what we've always done, like what will happen, right? Where certain pundits and politicians on the right have become extremely concerned about the fact that people are changing their patterns around marriage, marrying, as you said, later and less often, with this kind of growing amount of adults living alone or without a spouse or a partner. Obviously, divorce remains relatively common in America, and more women are choosing not to have children or to have children, but to raise them as single mothers. So we find ourselves in this position where conservatives are dreaming of some mythical good old days, right? Where traditional family values were the norm, but they're not just talking about it and waxing poetical, right? They're writing legislation and passing laws to do something about it. And that's a danger to all of us who believe in freedom and free will.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I saw three reasons why this was really concerning at this moment. One is that we really saw the rhetoric become much more heated and more extreme. And so it wasn't just that people were saying like, marriage is good, like we see benefits of marriage. It was that we were hearing, all of these right-wing influencers, the Jordan Petersons, the Ben Shapiros, the Steven Crowders, all really talking
about the
ones
that all hate women, by the way. Like, glad to hear your thoughts on marriage, like honest to God.
Yes, but all really saying that these changing family patterns, which are true, like families do look different today than they did 100 years ago. And many of us think that that's actually a very good thing, but that they were all saying that this is the end of Western civilization as we know it, is an existential threat to our country. And really just this very incendiary rhetoric that I found incredibly concerning. But not only that, what I also found concerning about this moment is that it's starting to show that it's having an effect in how people are understanding these changes to family life. The Pew Research Center, for example, does this public polling where they ask people, like, are some of these trends, these social trends, good for America or bad for America, bad for society, good for society? And over a 4-year period between 2018 and 2021, we saw a 7% increase in the percentage of Americans who viewed single mothers in particular as bad for society. Now, I happen to be one of those single mothers. And so this is a personal thing for me. It really is. I don't want my son, for example, growing up in a society where it is commonplace that people view our family as somehow deficient or second best. I think you can have strong families that look a whole variety of different ways. But the third thing was that, just as you talked about, Lee, we're really seeing a cohering policy agenda. It's not just rhetoric. It's not just changing attitudes. These folks are determined to do something about that. And they're determined to do something about this by putting a whole agenda together that incentivizes heterosexual marriage, punishes single parenthood, and tries to block or weaken laws and policies that enhance women's autonomy and control over their family decision-making. And nowhere is this more apparent than in the growing movement to roll back no-fault divorce laws in this country.
Yeah.
I remember very clearly, actually, days after the Dobbs decision came down, I turned to a friend of mine who I was talking to and I said, mark my words, divorce is next. They're going to be coming for no-fault divorce laws. And indeed, this is exactly what we've seen. We've seen legislation now being proposed in 4 states to make divorce harder to access. The rollback of no-fault divorce laws have actually become an official plank of the Texas Republican Party's platform. And we are seeing more and more kind of higher level elected Republican officials endorse this, not only J.D. Vance, but Josh Hawley, Marco Rubio. There's a kind of a growing chorus of folks who are saying that, we really need to be thinking about how easy it is supposedly to be getting divorced. And I think what is not examined enough when we hear that kind of rhetoric about no-fault divorce, is who they're really talking to. Now, no-fault divorce emerged in the late 1960s and 1970s as a way of just really making divorce a less legally contentious process. It used to have to be where you had to prove that your partner had wronged you in some way in the marriage. But what we've found is that since that process has been simplified, it has been women overwhelmingly who have taken advantage of those laws, initiating more than 2/3 of all divorce laws. So when J.D. Vance goes out there and makes these comments like, well, we have to, he's deriding people that supposedly shift spouses like people change underwear. Who is he really talking about? He is taking direct aim at women who he's basically implying are not taking these incredibly serious decisions about their family's futures very seriously. And when he derides, or when he kind of talks about the fact that there's value in sticking it out in chaotic or even violent marriages, he is intentionally undermining and minimizing the real harm to women's lives. No-fault divorce has been associated with all sorts of benefits to women's health and safety. We've seen lower rates of women's suicide, lower rates of homicide, lower rates of domestic violence when women have access to the legal process they need to get out of marriages that aren't working for them. And so I think this trend, it's not just sort of crazy rhetoric. It actually, like the rollback to Roe and the war on women's reproductive freedom, is a direct assault on women's autonomy and our ability to make really important decisions about our family structures.
Yeah. Ironically, it was the first no-fault divorce bill came into law in, I believe, 1969 with Ronald Reagan, if you can believe that. And then since then, people have, been able to leave their marriage without having to prove, say, their spouse was beating them or stealing their money or whatever. But as you're saying, this growing movement to make ending your marriage harder is really directed very strongly at women. As J.D. Vance said, one of the greatest tricks the sexual revolution played on the American populace is this idea that if your marriage is unhappy, and then he said, or even violent, you can just end it. And then he made that comment about, shifting your marriages like you change your underwear. It's just so crazy to imagine being trapped in a marriage that, by the way, is already tied to your health insurance, your life insurance, potentially your children, unless you can prove that you're allowed to get out of it, right? Yeah. That's insanely dangerous if you are being abused, first of all. It's also an incredibly ridiculous barrier to clear if you're not. And anyone in this country that's been through divorce knows that this is not an easy process. We don't have a divorce like we change our underwear. divorce is a nightmare and everyone knows that. Like there's a lot of people that don't get divorced because they're like, oh my God, it's just too much. You have to really want to get out of a marriage to get divorced. Divorce is not easy. So this concept that it's just made it so easy for us to just flip our spouses however we want is obscene. And this idea that divorce may be better. JD says divorce may be better for the man and the woman involved, but it's not better for the kids. Like you're supposed to stay there for the kids. And any kid that's been trapped in a marriage where the parents hated each other, or there was abuse, or there was emotional or physical damage being done will tell you that it does not help them. They are not better for their parents staying together. A lot of people will tell you that where their parents stayed together. And I think we have to remember that most of us are living these realities. Most of us have been divorced ourselves, or have been through divorce, or our parents got divorced, or our friends got divorced. This is not a simple thing. And what JD is saying is trap women in marriages where they have to remain the housekeeper, the homemaker. And it's a terrifying perspective, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I just, I do really worry about the implications of what's going to happen if this, in fact, does become more commonplace. And I think this escalated rhetoric is clearly tied to trying to drive a real policy agenda that, like the Dobbs decision, will have, could have some very potentially damaging effects on women's health, lives, and well-being.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, JD is saying the Democrats have completely twisted his words. And of course, that's not what he would want, but it's exactly what he wants. And it's exactly what he said. You've pointed out that this idea of marriage as a fundamental American institution isn't just cultural. It has economic and legal implications as well. For most of U.S. history, marriage was kind of this vessel that was given a privileged position and status. And probably still to this day, if you think about the amount of money we spend on marriages, the amount of money we spend on the ceremony, how crazy it is. All your bachelorettes are supposed to fly to so-and-so. It's like, it's a huge, big institution, right? And if you don't get married, it's marginalizing. You are not in the club, right? And you say that marriage was given this kind of exalted status in American society that we use as a tool to create order and define our cultural norms. But that tool is also used to maintain the hierarchies of inequality in our society. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Do you ever feel like money is just flying out of your account and you have no idea where it's going? Well, I know. It's going to subscriptions. Think about it. Between streaming services, fitness apps, delivery services, parenting apps, it's kind of endless. I'm guilty of this. I sometimes sign up for things and then I write it on a sticky to remember to cancel it. But do I remember to cancel it? No, I do not. Which is why Rocket Money is so great. Rocket Money helps you find out which subscriptions you're actually spending money on. And when you look at it, it's pretty astounding. Then you just get them to cancel the ones you don't want anymore. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills. It shows you all your subscriptions in one place, and if there's something you don't want, you can cancel it with a tap. Rocket Money will even try to get a refund for the last couple of months of wasted money and negotiate to lower your bills for you by up to 20%. All you have to do is take a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money does the rest. It's a terrific service, which is probably why Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving its members an average of $720 a year. So stop wasting money on things you don't use and cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. That's rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. One last time, rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. So, we're deep in the heart of summer, and that can be tough on your skin. If you have dry skin or you burn easily, it's a tough time for you. Although honestly, I'm sure most of our skin could use a little TLC. It's one of the reasons I like OneSkin. All of their products are created by skin longevity scientists in lab and clinical studies, so you know they work. And we're not just talking about surface benefits either. OneSkin's OS1 peptide targets the zombie cells that cause lines, wrinkles, and sagging skin. It's scientifically proven to reverse the skin's biological age at the cellular level. So whether you're laying out at the beach or hiking or heading out for vacation, OneSkin's OS1 powered sunscreens block UV rays while targeting the UV-induced skin aging you already have. This is the sunscreen I've been using all summer, and I'm excited about their new limited edition bundles called Summer Skincare Essentials that include their daily moisturizer and broad spectrum sunscreens for the face and body. There's a reason why OneSkin was named to Fast Company's list of the world's most innovative companies of 2024. Treating the symptoms rather than the root cause of aging has long been the norm. Most skincare available in the market is designed to provide a temporary reduction in visible signs of aging, addressing surface symptoms of an underlying decline in skin health. OneSkin is more than skincare. It's about skin longevity, targeting the root cause of aging to help you look and feel your best at every age. Get started today with 15% off by using the code PoliticsGirl at oneskin.co. That's 15% off at oneskin.co with the code PoliticsGirl. And after you purchase, if they ask you where you heard about them, please show our show some support and tell them that we sent you. It's time to expect more from your skincare routine. Invest in the health of your skin with OneSkin. I love that Smalls is sponsoring our show these days. Not just because Smalls is a cat food with protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free ingredients that you find in your fridge and delivered right to your door, but because paying attention to cats and the owners that love them right now when the far right is attacking cat ladies just thrills me. I love cats. I don't have a cat, but there are two of the most beautiful cats that live across the street with my husband's friend, and my husband ends up feeding them a lot. And their food was kind of gross, and he thought they could eat better. Now, not only are the cats happy, Sean's friend is happy because they no longer have smelly cat food. If you have cats, you know how stinky cat food can be. But there is a reason veterinarians.org rates Smalls as 10 out of 10 for ingredient quality. These cute little kitties we have that live in our house are actually descended from ferocious desert cats that have hunted prey for food. And your cat isn't any different. They need fresh, protein-packed meals to be at their best. Cat food company brands know this, but they choose to put profit first, which means they fill their food with mysterious meat byproducts and artificial flavoring and preservatives with names I don't even want to try to pronounce. And then we force our beloved pets to eat this garbage every day, which is probably why owners who have switched to Smalls reported an 88% overall health improvement in their cat. 88%. That's a big deal. In fact, Smalls is so confident your cat will love their product that you can try it risk-free. That means they will refund your money if your cat won't eat their food. So perhaps now is the time to make the switch to Smalls. Head to smalls.com/politicsgirl and use the promo code politicsgirl at checkout for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. That's the best offer you'll find, but you have to use my code politicsgirl for 50% off your first order. One last time, that's promo code politicsgirl for 50% off your first order plus free shipping. Let's go, cat people. We got your back. Having traveled so much lately for work, I can tell you a good blackout shade is a wonder, and now I kind of want them in my bedroom at home. Which is why I'm psyched this show is sponsored by 3 Day Blinds, because I'm going to need some help, and the people at 3 Day Blinds really know what they're doing. 3 Day Blinds are the leading manufacturer of custom window treatments in the US. They have local, professionally trained design consultants with an average of 10 plus years experience to provide expert guidance on the right blinds for you from the comfort of your own home. You just set an appointment and you'll get a free, no obligation quote the same day. And the experts at 3 Day Blinds handle everything. They design, measure, and install your new blinds so you can just sit back and let the pros do the work. No buying the wrong length or having them not fit or even drilling into your wall a million times, which is totally my move. Check out their Instagram. You'll see right away how nice their stuff is, and 3 Day Blinds has been putting out a consistently high-quality product for 45 years, which is probably why they're the highest-rated blinds company on Trustpilot. No matter your specific needs, be it motorization, home automation, room darkening, or child safety blinds, 3 Day Blinds has thousands of options that will fit into your budget and style, with actual samples so you won't have to just be guessing what your blinds will look like, which, let's be honest, most of us have done over the years. And when it comes to home renovations, we all have questions. What blinds fit arched windows? What are better, roller or Roman shades? No matter your questions or specific windows, 3 Day Blinds is ready to help you out. Right now, you can get 3 Day Blinds, buy one, get one 50% off on custom blinds, shades, shutters, and drapery. For a free, no charge, no obligation consultation, just head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. That's buy one, get one 50% off when you head to 3dayblinds.com/politicsgirl. One last time, that's the number 3, DAY, blinds.com/politicsgirl. Last time promo code PoliticsGirl for 50% off your first order, plus free shipping. That tool is also used to maintain the hierarchies of inequality in our society. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, we really did a deep dive on the history of marriage over the course of the podcast and looked at, because I think that we have all this soaring rhetoric that we use around marriage that makes it, sound like it's just natural or innate, the way that we're destined to be as, people and kind of how we realize our true potential in life. But the bottom line is that pretty immersed coercive powers went in to establishing marriage as this cultural ideal. And even though in today's age, most of us think of marriage as a kind of a public symbol of our love and commitment to our partners, really, it is still very much an economic institution. Married people in the United States receive 1,100 federal benefits, laws, privileges that you're not entitled to as an unmarried person. And so there's still like incredible incentives that the government uses to encourage people to get married. But when you look back at history, it's not just in the early days of the US that marriage kind of was incentivized or encouraged. It was really the sole container for legal recognition and status in this country. If you were anything other than a white landowning man in the early days, like you really didn't just miss out on having some rights by not being married. You didn't have any. And so certainly for women, if you wanted any kind of economic security in your life, marriage was a must, even though, ironically, women had no economic rights within their marriage. The legal doctrine of the time was coverture, right? Which basically meant covered women. And so the minute you were married as a woman, you stopped having a legal identity. You assumed your husband's legal identity. Any earnings that you had were his earnings. Your children were legally his children. If you had no political voice, right? He voted on behalf of your family. This was really the container that we established to kind of maintain these gender hierarchies and create order. What we also looked at over the course of the podcast was the race dimension of marriage, right? I mean, obviously, enslaved people being excluded from the legal institution of marriage altogether. And then in the Reconstruction era, following the Civil War, marriage being the vehicle through which many formerly enslaved Black Americans really were able to access more benefits, more economic opportunity, either kind of through explicit policies, veteran benefits, land agreements for sharecropping, or sort of the respectability that marriage conferred, which then was sort of a way of making the case for additional legal rights, particularly enfranchisement. And just to even round out the picture even further, not only were people excluded from marriage, but we had a pretty violent campaign in this country enforcing conformity to marriage in populations that structured families differently, primarily Native American tribes. And so in one of our episodes this season, we go back to when then Secretary of the Interior, Henry Teller, after sort of Native tribes were relocated out west, went and kind of, was reporting back and not surprisingly found these, different family structures where marriage was much less sort of binding, where this notion of patriarchal families just didn't exist, where families were more matrilineal, where women could kind of discard husbands, here and there. And it just was very different. And it really represented a threat to social order. And so a lot of the government policies that we saw regarding Native American families in the wake of the Teller letter were designed to force conformity with a particular family form that was considered desirable. So this notion that it was just kind of, we've all been sort of, this has always just been the way it is. I think we have to really unpack, and we have to say it has become an ideal because we've created it as an ideal, because government policies and laws have reinforced that as a cultural ideal. And there's been other ways through culture, like you said, that's been advanced and promoted as well.
Yeah. I was just in New York recently for like a day, and I made the trip to Broadway to see that play Suffs, which I cannot recommend enough. It is so incredibly excellent. But there's a song in it about marriage and what happens to women in a marriage. And the song is called If We Were Married, and it's a duet between what will become love interest in the show. But he's basically like, I love you and we should get married. And she's like, here's what really happens to me when they get married, right? And this show it's taking place at the time in 1916. And she points out that getting married isn't just about having a partner and being in love, that if you're married, women would forfeit, as you were saying, their legal autonomy and their possessions to the masculine spouse. And the song goes on to point out that, contraception was a federal crime. So you had the babies that were put into you, right? That all your earnings as a woman would be in your husband's name, that you couldn't control your spending or open a bank account or sign a contract or hire a lawyer, because once you were married, women basically became non-existent in the eyes of the law. Everything belonged to their husband. And to be clear, not much has really changed in that department until like the 70s, when we started putting in rules for women getting bank accounts and being able to sign loans and that kind of thing. And also, this is sort of what the Republican Party would love us to go back to now. I mean, here I am sitting in a theater in New York in 2024, right? And they're pointing out that being married was an incredibly rigid role for years, right? Yeah. It was a role that women were taught to aspire to. You have to get married. You have to find your spouse. You have to get coupled up, 2 by 2. It goes back to the flippin' arc. But it was expressly designed to keep women under control. At first, back in the day, it was an agreement between your father and the neighboring farm or whatever, and you were put out there as literally as property with your dowry to kind of combine financial interests. And then it became this way to control women. And we have to remember, this is not that long ago in our history, that there was a time that if your husband physically beat you or raped you, it was not a crime. And although that's not the case now in America, it is the case in other countries in the world, like Russia. In Russia, domestic violence does not exist. It is not illegal to beat your wife in Putin's Russia. It only becomes a problem if she ends up dead or in the hospital, because then it became a crime. So I'm sitting there listening to this song, which is amazing because it's teaching you a little history lesson in this cute little ditty. But it was also fascinating because the male character in the show is so astounded at how horrible marriage laws are for women, right? He didn't have any idea. He just thought it was this romantic hearts in your eyes relationship thing. And she explains to him, this suffragette explains to him, and he changes his own tune and he ends up fighting alongside women's rights. And it's a fascinating look, using art, of course, to explain it. I'm listening to you today talk about this, and I'm thinking of an old Sex and the City episode where Carrie goes to a baby shower and she takes a really expensive gift, and the hostess makes her take her shoes off at the door. And, she's wearing Manolo Blahniks and the shoes go missing. And so she says to her friend, like, my shoes went missing at your house. You made me take them off. And she's like, they're just shoes. She's like, nope, they're really expensive shoes. And she goes back and adds up all the things she gave this woman over the years for getting married, for having a baby shower, for having a wedding shower, for her actual wedding present. She's like, I've spent thousands and thousands of dollars celebrating this woman's life choices, and she's shaming me for mine. And it's a fascinating look at how we elevate marriage in our society, and how it's also just a way to keep women under control and under the patriarchy.
Yeah, and I think really what this marriage panic at this particular moment is about is that it's sort of impossible to separate it from the fact that thanks to all of these social movements in the latter half of the 20th century, with birth control, with access to abortion rights, with the ability to get a credit card in your own name and to have legal access to credit, women have been less dependent on marriage. Rebecca Traister wrote this amazing book back in, I think, 2016, All the Single Ladies. We had her on the podcast. And the way she talks about it is, it used to be that if you wanted to have a child, you had to be married. If you wanted to have a sex life, you had to be married. Now these things are available to women regardless of marital status. And many people, certainly the two of us included, think that's a very good thing. And so when you see this kind of conservative panic about marriage, what it is really about is the fact that we have all of these legal and cultural changes that make women less dependent on marriage. And so their solutions are to bring those back, to further incentivize marriage, to further stigmatize those who don't adhere to that lifestyle, and, frankly, to make it more legally binding.
Yeah. I mean, as a lot of people have pointed out, one of the great ironies of the modern conservative movement and their thought is that these same people that demand virtually no government oversight in business, in commerce, in taxation are the same people advocating for giant government influence in some of our most personal decisions like reproduction and marriage. And you would think that who you marry or when you marry or how you structure your marriage or if you stay in a marriage is better left to the people involved. Just like what you can and cannot do with your body is a decision that should be best left to you. But the Heritage Foundation and the Project 2025 people, they don't see it that way, right? Their plan is to remake the entire federal government along some sort of theocratic line where certain marriages,
Yep.
not just marriages, certain marriages would receive priority while others wouldn't even qualify as marriage. Project 2025 is very clearly calling for a biblically based, social science reinforced definition of marriage and family, which they narrowly define as heterosexual and intact. So what are your thoughts on the Project 2025 agenda?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this is where we see it most clearly. So the
Right.
very first promise, it calls to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. Now, this encompasses a whole host of things, but basically what it goes about saying is it uses all this sort of incendiary rhetoric. Again, I'll just quote some of this here. The world has never seen a thriving, healthy, free, and prosperous society where most children grow up without their married parents. If current trends continue, we are headed towards social implosion. So these are sort of the hand wavy stakes that they are setting up. Then they go ahead and start attacking the Biden administration for supposedly promoting LGBTQ equality, for incentivizing single motherhood by de-incentivizing work and penalizing marriage. Now, we can talk more about what they're really attacking there, and I'd love to come back to this, but then what they call for is government to use a whole array of levers to elevate family authority, formation, and cohesion to their top priority, and even use government power, including through the tax code, to restore the American family. Now, we've already talked about the fact that currently there are 1,100 federal benefits to marriage under federal law. The American tax code has long given financial advantage to married couples where one partner, presumably the father, works and one partner, presumably the mother, stays home. But families where there's a large discrepancy in earnings between partners, they already fare much better than families that have a more equitable kind of income, or if you're obviously a single individual. So we already provide a whole host of economic benefits. What Project 2025 is proposing is that we amp that up even further, provide more benefits to married two-parent families that adhere, heterosexual two-parent families who adhere to this mold. But what they're also talking about doing, and this is, I think, what's really important to look at J.D. Vance's record as well, is what they oppose. And so this kind of notion that, well, what the Biden administration is trying to incentivize single parenting. What the Biden administration's economic record, kind of the proposals and what we see Vice President Harris really leaning into on the campaign trail is investment in what's called the care economy, right? The child care, public support for child care, elder care, paid family leave. Now, none of these are anti-family policies. These are overwhelmingly the kind of policies that will strengthen all families, including provide a lot of benefits to all sorts of married two-parent families. But what conservatives are up in arms about is that they do not uniquely advantage families that adhere to the mold. So when we have these policies that provide economic benefits to everyone, they basically give people more freedom to structure their relationships and family lives in the ways that make sense for them. And that is an existential threat for this Project 2025 conservative movement. They want to maintain the privileges for just those who are deemed deserving and ensure that other families are left out of that. We're constantly told, well, it's better for children if parents are, if they're raised in two-parent married families because, they have more economic resources. Well, this is by design. There's been some studies recently that have looked at what distinguishes the US from sort of all of its Western industrialized counterparts. And what distinguishes us is that we have a greater economic penalty for single parenthood than virtually any of our rich industrial counterparts. So it is not innately true that single mothers are going to be worse off economically than married two-parent families. That is a policy choice. And the lack of investment in healthcare, the lack of investment in childcare, the lack of investment in paid family leave, all of these things really equate to a unique penalty against single mothers in the United States that has made them more, disproportionately more likely to be poor here than in any other rich Western democracy. So that is what they are taking aim at, restoring and maximizing that penalty to single parenthood, not, in order to really provide those maximum incentives for people to adhere to their preferred family form.
Yeah. They kind of feel like we've been penalizing, quote, traditional marriage by helping other forms of families, which of course is crazy to me because I grew up, in the 70s and 80s when even Sesame Street was showing me all different types of families exist. You know what I mean? And we're backtracking again now. But this idea that married nuclear families are the only type of families that really need your support and your attention. What keeps sort of striking my mind is freedom. Like,
Yes.
This has nothing to do with freedom. You're not free to choose who you want to marry. You're not free to choose to leave your marriage. You're not free to choose to raise your family how you want. You're not free to love who you want. There is so much taking of freedom by a country that defines itself by its freedom that it astounds me. I mean, to hold up this idea, Project 2025 calls for things like the development of faith-based programs. Again, this is a theocratic-based system that should be incorporated in local churches and mentorship programs to do things like affirm the position of the father, to teach fathers what it means to be a father, and not, as they say, a, quote, gender-neutral parent. And that's direct language from the mandate, right? Project 2025 claims that the Department of Health and Human Services should proudly state that men and women are biological realities and that married men and women are the ideal natural family structure because children have the right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them, which is probably how we get to these folks suggesting that rapists deserve parental rights, right? It's just bananas to me. And at the end of the day, it comes back to this idea of this heterosexual, patriarchal family structure, which again goes back to the song from XUFs. It's about controlling women, and ultimately then women control the children, but the man sits on the very top. And I think that's where they want us back. And they're going to create a million policies to force that to happen.
It's one of the reasons I've been so delighted, honestly, to see Vice President Harris lean into freedom as really the, kind of the central theme of her campaign. And even in using Beyonce's song as her walk on music, it really is, I think, appropriately reclaiming that word that I think has been co-opted by the right and twisted in ways that aren't about freedom whatsoever. And I also think, now I hail from Minnesota, so I'm having a proud Minnesota week here with the with the selection of Tim Walz as Vice President Harris's running mate. But when he was on stage at the Philadelphia rally and talking about the golden rule in Minnesota of mind your own damn business, when it comes to these personal decisions, I really believe that is where the majority of Americans are at. And yes, people should be, if There's nothing wrong with staying home with children. There's nothing wrong with, having whatever sort of balance and roles and responsibilities works best for people's families. We respect the caregiving that people provide into a variety of, loved ones in our lives, right? But we should be honoring that in its multitude of forms and encouraging people to be providing that love and care and support to a whole variety of people. It is not just in one particular family formation that is valuable. It is valuable in all sorts of families and frankly in all sorts of communities. And we would be richer and better off if we started policies that helped facilitate that more broadly.
I couldn't agree with you more there. And I do agree that the Democratic ticket is something like we've never seen in a long time. And it really does bring back this idea of freedom and hope and extending the care agenda to lots of people in lots of different ways. We don't all have to look the same, act the same, think the same, love the same. We all have the same worth innately,
yes.
Which really is what we have in our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. And honestly, we are. We all have the same worth and we should all be supported the same way. This kind of rolling back no-fault divorce, opposing care agenda and policies that just sort of trap women in the home, getting rid of gay marriage, all this threat to traditional marriage. It's not a threat. Traditional marriage still exists, but what we don't want to do is trap people because that's the antithesis of freedom. I want to thank you so much for joining us today, Julie. Please tell people how they can follow your work and listen to your just incredibly excellent podcast, which I can't say enough about.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, White Picket Fence is available wherever you listen to your podcast. So please catch up with this season. It was a really fun season to be doing and kind of aligns perfectly with the moment we find ourselves in, sadly. Much of my writing is available on my website, www.juliekkohler.com. I'm on Twitter at Julie Kohler1 and on Instagram at Julie Kohler Writes.
Amazing. And of course, this all comes back to fighting back, right? The momentum might have shifted right now and it feels very exciting and hopeful again. But what these people on the right want and what these conservatives want and what Project 2025 wants is still a major threat to us and our way of life and our freedoms. And we have to make sure that the people who want to take us down that road are not successful in November and they're not successful moving forward, because this is just an antiquated idea that can be sung in a song in 1916, but has no place in today's world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've seen these marriage panics at every stage as marriage has evolved and become more inclusive, more egalitarian, and frankly, more fulfilling. And it is my hope that we can, at some point, be done with the moral panics about marriage and really start investing in the many ways that we can build really successful and strong families.
Here's to that.
All right.
We're not going back, right? We're not going back.
Exactly.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
So that was Julie Kohler, reminding us that we need to continue to push back against this marriage panic that we have seen a million times before. That these far-right conservatives are determined to take us back to a time where we had less freedom, less autonomy, less decisions and rights over our own choices, but they wrap it in the guise of looking out for the family and the children when it's truly about who has status and who gets control. We need to make sure these people never get the power to inflict their narrow-minded, backwards worldview on our society, and we need to do that at the ballot box in November and with our actions and votes moving forward. I want to thank Julie for joining us today and you for caring enough about democracy to be here. Now go hug your family, whatever form it takes, and have a wonderful day. I'll be online all this week at the convention, so check it out on Politics Girl YouTube to follow along. Until next week, PG out. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Midas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.